All right, so Claude Fable 5 and Grok 4.5 are going head to head, and the gap is way bigger than I expected. On SWE Bench Pro, Fable 5 hits 80.3% and Grok 4.5 lands at 64.7%, which is a 15.6 point difference on the hardest coding eval out there. Both models dropped recently and people are picking between them right now, so the stakes are real. I'm running them through 4 concrete tests: long context handling, coding, latency, and cost. And every number I use traces back to a named source, no vendor spin, no made up figures. Now, Grok 4.5 is 8.3 times cheaper on output tokens, which sounds like a no-brainer for high volume work, but there's one number buried in the data that could cost you a lot more than you save. So this one's for you if you're routing real work through an API and want to know which model actually holds up, developers running agentic pipelines, teams processing long documents. Anyone watching their monthly bill, the wrong pick here, doesn't just feel bad. It either blows your budget or ships broken outputs to real users. Test 1, long context document handling. You're feeding an 80-page contract into a model, and it comes back with a competent-sounding summary that cites the wrong page, or worse, a page that doesn't exist. It goes into a deliverable. And now you've got a real problem. That's the failure mode we're looking at here. What surprised me was how clean the gap is. Fable 5 runs a 1 million token window. Grok 4.5 caps at 500,000, so that's double the capacity right there. And in a community test where someone ran the same 80-page PDF through both, Fable 5 cited correct page numbers and Grok 4.5 produced a hallucinated summary. One test, take it with a grain of salt, but it's consistent with the broader pattern. Fable 5 takes test 1. Honestly, I was expecting the context window difference to matter less in practice, but the accuracy gap on real documents is pretty hard to ignore. And the 1 million token ceiling plus consistent quality at depth is a structural win, not just a spec sheet number. That puts Fable 5 up 1-0 on the scoreboard. Test 2, coding task completion. You're running an agentic coding pipeline. The model gets halfway through a refactor, then it produces broken code that passes a surface check, but fails in production. You've burned tokens, you've burned time, and now you're debugging something that looked fine. That's the question of which model actually resolves real software tasks at scale. Okay, so what I found here is pretty interesting. On SWE Bench Pro, Fable 5 scores 80.3% and Grok 4.5 scores 64.7%. So that 15.6 point gap is real, but on Terminal Bench 2.1, it's 84.3% versus 83.3%, which is basically noise. And the coding agent index from artificial analysis has them at 77 versus 76. So the gap depends a lot on the type of task you're running. Before I call a winner, I want to be honest about something. These benchmarks ran in different harnesses. Claude Code for Fable 5 and Grok Build for Grok 4.5. So you're not comparing identical setups. And on the faster terminal style tasks, Grok 4.5 basically matches Fable 5. The big gap only shows up on harder, longer horizon evals. So if your work skews toward quick scripting, the gap is way smaller than it looks. Fable 5 wins. Test 2, I was expecting Grok 4.5 to close the gap more given how strong it looks on Terminal Bench, but on SWE Bench Pro, Fable 5 is ahead by 15.6 points, and that's not noise. Fable 5 goes up 2-0 on the scoreboard, though I'd say the margin really only holds on complex multi-step tasks. Test 3, response latency under load. You fire off a request in your app, your user is sitting there watching a spinner, and nothing comes back for 90 seconds. And that's not a model quirk, that's a user experience problem that kills retention. If you're building anything interactive or running high throughput pipelines, slow first token latency is a real cost. So I looked at the artificial analysis measurements, and this one was pretty eye-opening. Fable 5 at max effort clocks a 109-second time to first token, and Grok 4.5 comes in at 13.8 seconds, which is not a small gap on output speed once it starts generating. Fable 5 runs at 63.4 tokens per second, and Grok 4.5 runs at around 90. Though these are different test setups, so treat the throughput comparison as directional. Now, the 109-second TTFT for Fable 5 is its thinking overhead at max effort, not a broken API, and at lower effort levels, it drops substantially, so the gap narrows. But community reports also flag that Grok 4.5 hits rate limit walls during peak hours pretty regularly, which the raw latency numbers don't capture at all. So Grok 4.5 speed advantage is real but not guaranteed. Grok 4.5 takes test 3. I was expecting Fable 5's effort controls to close this more, and they do at lower settings, but the ceiling case gap of 109 seconds versus 13.8 seconds is just too wide to call it close, and Grok 4.5 also generates tokens faster once it starts. That brings the scoreboard to Fable 5.2, Grok 4.51. Test 4, cost versus output quality. You're scaling up an agentic workflow and your token bill starts climbing fast. So you switch to the cheaper model, but now your outputs need manual review half the time because the model is hallucinating and you've traded one cost for another. That's the trap this test is really about. What surprised me here is how dramatic the price gap is. Fable 5 costs $50 per million output tokens. Grok 4.5 costs $6, so that's 8.3 times cheaper on output. And per agentic coding task, it's $11.80 versus $2.49, which is 4.7 times cheaper. But the number I wasn't expecting is that an independent measurement cited by Tech Times puts Grok 4.5's hallucination rate at 54%, and that's a serious caveat. Grok 4.5 wins test 4 on raw cost, and honestly, the price gap is so big, I couldn't give it to Fable 5, even with the hallucination caveat. But I want to be clear, 54% is not a rounding error. And if your workflow needs clean outputs without heavy verification, that cheap token price gets expensive fast. Scoreboard is now tied. Fable 5.2, Grok 4.52. So here's where Fable 5 wins cleanly. It's got the 1 million token window, double Grok 4.5 ceiling, and it actually cites correct page numbers on long documents in real testing. On SWE Bench Pro, it's 80.3% versus 64.7%, a 15.6 point lead on the hardest coding eval. And for long horizon, knowledge dense work where coherence across thousands of words matters, Fable 5 is the stronger pick. And here's where Grok 4.5 wins cleanly. It's 8.3 times cheaper on output tokens, $6 per million versus $50, and 4.7 times cheaper per agentic coding task. It hits first token in 13.8 seconds versus 109 seconds at max effort. It's available on all cursor clients with no usage credit gates, and it ranks number 1 on artificial analysis agentic tool use index, despite sitting 4th overall on the intelligence index. Going in, I expected Grok 4.5's price advantage to be the whole story, but that 54% hallucination rate really changes the math. So here's the decision rule. If you're doing long document analysis, complex multi-step coding, or anything where a ROM output has real consequences, go with Fable 5. And if you're running high volume, lower stakes agentic tasks where you can verify outputs cheaply, Grok 4.5's cost wins.